Tell Me Why has a lot of potential to be an interesting game, but simply fails to become that. With the title having the player take control of a transgender male who recently underwent gender surgery and was in a center for troubled teens for much of his childhood, all while recently reconnecting with his twin sister and attempted to move from his past due to him being responsible for his mother's death. The issue is that the story attempts to rush through itself and introduce new problems without fully fleshing out the recent dilemmas with short-term resolutions. Tell Me Why is simply a checkbox narrative game that attempts to tell a profound story but ends up being a prime example of mediocrity at its finest. Tell Me Why stars twins Allison and Tyler. Allison has been living a relatively normal life with her adoptive father, and Tyler is getting out of the Fireweed Residential Center after recently undergoing the first steps of becoming a man. The two are shown to be very close. Tyler is more outgoing and polite, but he also only trusts his sister, becoming a lot more gated when people get too close, whereas Allison is snarky and reserved, but a lot more of a people person. Right out of the gates, you learn what happened to cause their situation. Tyler killed his mother out of self-defense to save himself. This awful situation was sparked when Tyler cut his hair short, triggering his mother to go berserk and nearly shoot Tyler, as it was the first steps of him coming to terms with his identity. Because of this terrible memory, the siblings have a deep resentment of their mother, often shifting memories to reflect this. Both twins want to move from their past by selling their mother's home and moving far away from their home Delos County, which is a small town in Alaska. When you enter the home for the first time, you see the opposite is more likely true, with the house peppered with photos of their mother Marianne and themselves in happier times when they were young. This also exposes a special ability the twins have, the ability to telepathically speak to one another and relive memories, called the Voice. However, in classic Don't Nod fashion, these abilities are never explained and they just simply exist. This has always been a major issue in Don't Nod video games, specifically in their narrative-based titles. I was able to accept this in Life is Strange, but after constantly using this angle, it has become a worn cliche, as it's never brought up as something part of this world, but simply a way to make the story more distinct or reveal critical story elements easier. Without any way to link their unique talent, it becomes more of a gimmick to simply further the plot, using the power to relive memories. Like the photos providing contradictory information as conveyed by Tyler and Allison about their mother, the memories that Tyler and Allison relive are also unreliable. They only provide visions based on what the person remembers and brings it up to light as they lie dormant within the person's mind, leading to memories that contradict each other. This can be a profound moment that leads to drama between the two, but instead they simply accept the player's choice. Whether you choose to accept Allison or Tyler's account, the other accepts that truth without a issue. Another major element within the narrative is the Book of Goblins, a collection of tales written by Marianne that directly reflect her life. Everything within these stories happened in her life, and she fashioned a fantasy world where her children would exist through these stories, calling them goblins and giving them a way to provide a disguise to their extremely poor life in a different lens. So much that she fashioned the entire system around this book into a cipher for extensive puzzles that expose more information about her life. Marianne's reliance to try and make a self-reliant life was met with massive failure, and because of this, she relied heavily on community donations. Due to the small town of Delos County depending on one another, they were more than willing to accept her, but only to an extent. This is where the story starts to take sharp turns and, to an extent, burns. With the twins exploring the house, you find out that not only their interpretation of Marianne is riddled with holes, with Tyler often remembering the darker memories of his childhood, but Marianne had a lot of secrets of her own. Tyler is completely convinced that Marianne was livid about him showing early showings of accepting who he will eventually become, but it becomes apparent that this was the opposite. Like the photos conveyed, she loved her children, and was learning how to understand what Tyler was going through. This sparks the first conflict within the game as Tyler and Allison try to figure out why Marianne attacked Tyler, and if her death wasn't caused by outside elements that they were unaware of. The Book of Goblins provides a key to understanding the past. while also providing the primary tool to the most significant puzzles. There is a lot of short stories in this book, about I think 10 or 12, and while the player is given the option to force their way through these puzzles, usually involve breaking the lock of these puzzles, it is a little annoying to find the right story and pick out the key details, because it invokes feelings of annoyance rather than success, because many of the solutions are easy. You just have to scour through the novel to find them. It serves more of a treasure hunt rather than an actual puzzle. Uncovering secrets into Marianne's past does offer a lot of potential in terms of drama, as you'll only be able to speak to various people within the community who are willing to share their secrets, and many of them are unwilling to do so, with Tyler and Allison using their ability to remember the past in order to catch lies in their conversations. There is a diverse selection of supporting cast members throughout this adventure, such as Michael, who is a close friend to Allison, a family friend, Sam, who often fixed Marianne's home, store owners Tessa and Tom, and the adopted father of Allison, Eddie, who serves as chief of police for Delos. With the exception of Michael, who serves more of a buffer between Allison and Tyler, each one of them has small clues to showcase into Marianne's death and reveal new light into her past. Peppered in between are pointless conversations in an attempt to make the much less important supporting cast have more interest in, such as Allison talking to random officers at the station that really don't offer much. It's like one of those roundabout conversations you are forced to make when you're interacting with people you've just met. You just speak about whatever happens or what is simply current in order to pad the conversation, and it's painfully obvious here when that happens.
You were not kidding about the cobbler. This may be her best batch ever.
Right?
When you reach the end of Tell Me Why, this is where the major issue starts to become much more apparent. It doesn't leave you feeling fulfilled like you accomplished anything. You find out more about Marianne's past, but it doesn't really result in anything profound or feel like you've sacrificed anything significant. Instead, the story feels like it was just rushing through certain elements in order to get to the end. For example, once you reach to a certain point of episode 2 and find out more about Marianne's death, the story suddenly takes a shift. Suddenly, Tyler now wants to know more about his father, despite never ever showing any interest in the topic until now, not even Allison with all the visions they have had. Now they want to know about the identity of their father, and they then try to make it like it's a difficult thing to find out given their situation. So let me just explain. In Life is Strange, Max was the only one capable of solving the problems presented to her because of her unique abilities. There were no distinct answers, and Max had to make choices in unique circumstances. The same is present with Sean and Daniel, with Sean simply trying his best in a tough situation where no right answer existed because his situation was linked to Daniel's ability and a lot of really bad luck. And Tell Me Why, there are several ways Allison and Tyler could have solved their current issues. Marianne wasn't a ghost. She left a large paper trail that you figure out during the end of the game, and considering Tell Me Why takes place within our world, a modified version of our world, with Tyler making note of current political decisions within the current US climate, many services and products are available to resolve many of their queries and even find out about their lineage. You see, unlike Max or Sean, where the solution to their current problems added interesting mysteries to see what the solution could be, Tyler and Allison's dramas have many different ways they could have solved it, such as when they want to find out more about Marianne's past, well, you can hire a PI detective who can literally trace down her entire lineage. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard, considering that she is from a small county now. And then learning about their family lineage and trying to find out who their father is, there are readily available DNA tests, and considering again they live in an extremely small area, the options are quite limited in who could be the father. And all of this doesn't require the need for telepathy. And once you find one of these holes and Tell Me Why, you start to see how the story starts to fall apart drastically. The writers did try to create this artificial sense of urgency, like the twins had to find out everything about their dad and Marianne within days because they were selling their home and moving to Juneau. However, nothing in this game has a timestamp, as the gameplay does reflect this. They literally find everything that happened years ago within days of asking the right questions, and in one case breaking the law with no consequences. Even when the game tries to implement some sort of time urgency, such as when Allison and Tyler need to break into the police station to learn about Marianne's death, you can literally take as much time as you want, and afterwards there are no consequences to doing this, even though it's technically a felony of what they did. This leads to the other major issue with Tell Me Why. Choices. You still have the option to shift the narrative, but they are extremely limited, and with no time limit, you don't really care about what you're doing. There's no longer an option to remain quiet during conversations outside from the purely optional dialogue that is triggered when you see the LT trigger. I played on the Xbox One, so that's what appeared. And the choices offer very little changes. Allison and Tyler will remain close regardless of your choices, which is a bit strange. Neither will think twice when you accept one interpretation of their memories over the other, or when one of them ignores the other when in difficult situations. For example, Allison has a huge panic attack in episode 3 as a secret she has kept for years starts to eat away at her, but regardless of what you choose to do in the following event, where you have to either choose between revealing the secret or not doing it, you have no consequences to this. Allison simply has no more panic attacks despite showcasing that she had a severe one within the previous situation. The same thing goes for Tyler. You can act like a jaded a-hole towards Allison, and she'll still treat you with the same love and affection as she always has. I made Tyler throw her adopted father's ring in the river despite her showing how important it was to her, and she only mentions it one time, and Tyler just says, "I'm sorry," and that's it. She should have thrown a fit, showing that this meant a lot to her, as Eddie has been with her ever since Tyler went to the corrections facility and has raised her in this very difficult situation. But no, he just says, "I'm sorry," and they let it go. This may seem insignificant, but it happens multiple times throughout the game. They do something bad to one another, say "I'm sorry," and they move on like nothing happened, which doesn't really make sense if they keep doing it to one another and just keep forgiving each other. It just seems so unrealistic that these two siblings can say something or do something hurtful, say "I'm sorry," and just go past it every single time.
That was an asshole move.
To put it mildly.
I deserve that. Sorry I tossed the ring.
I'm sorry too. I just hoped we could wrap everything up with a grand gesture and move on to our perfectly normal lives.
What? This isn't normal? Still your brother?
Still your sister.
In comparison, in Life is Strange 2, Daniel will openly showcase his frustration with Sean. This is what made their relationship so believable, because they acted like siblings, unlike here where they just act like, I don't know what they act like. It's a bit strange to me. And the narrative simply does not complement the gameplay. In an effort to make the player read through the Book of Goblins, Allison and Tyler would purposely forget critical points of the stories that they've been read over and over by their mother, and these stories are 1 or 2 pages with very minor critical details. So it makes no sense that they're unable to make basic connections such as which characters are representative of which person, all of which are people they've known their entire life and know what qualities they have and how they're connected to Marianne, but they simply do not know. It doesn't make any sense. This is a forced way to create puzzle sections within the narrative, but these are so basic that it's almost insulting to the intelligence of the twins that the player has to do them. Not to mention the boring fetch objectives mean to extend the life of each of these episodes. In one instance, and I am not kidding, you actually have to locate Allison's phone, which she forgot in the basement of her home. I just can't make this stuff up. I don't know why this is in the game. This goes for the collectibles as well, which are toys that Allison and Tyler had since they were kids, but are somehow placed in random locations throughout the game, with no one having picked them up in years or even found them. It again makes no sense. They just happen to be in these locations. The game does end with a lukewarm conclusion. They find out who their father's identity is and the reasons for Marianne's actions that led to her death, all of which lead to nothing, as the final choice is a matter of opinion. Despite everything that transpires, the evidence, and even the first-hand account of what happened, you get to decide what really happened that night with Marianne, choosing to ignore everything you've learned or believe a clearly false memory. And that's it. Tyler and Allison just go on with their lives regardless if you chose to ignore everything you've learned or just believe what you thought was true in the beginning, almost like they haven't advanced as characters. Again, you can be extremely jaded as Allison or Tyler and they'll still end up caring for one another regardless. You don't feel like there was any consequences for everything you've done throughout this adventure, and it just frankly ends. So tell me why it just feels rushed, with the world contradicting itself. Tyler, who lost a significant amount of his life being at Fireweed, shows nothing but glee after leaving. Apparently he had an extremely supportive system, but then fails to maintain a connection with the same people who gave him that support. Then Tyler also mentions that Alaska, where Tell Me Why is located, has a serious problem of treating people with mental issues, choosing to imprison them by this random flyer you find on the desk of a police officer, but somehow he was at a facility full of accepting kids. Or how about how Allison never conveyed having issues about her past, but suddenly has a full panic attack in the 3rd episode, even having an application ready for an occasion. It never feels like a logical stream of events. Things just happen for the sake of the situation. We learned that Eddie donated thousands to make sure Tyler got into Fireweed as opposed to somewhere else, which would have been much harsher. But again, they never really bring this up. In fact, Tyler never brings this up or thanks him. Or how he kept Allison in Delos by lying about her application when she got into this very profound art program. Again, never brought up, and Allison still treats Eddie like he's this incredible person. Heck, there's an instance where you expose your abilities to Michael and nothing happens. Like, he literally doesn't bring this up again. I don't know what's the point of these choices. Allison and Tyler's relationship is the most strange out of everything. They love each other, I get that, but they often ignore when the other acts terribly. Tyler constantly pursues answers to Marianne despite Allison being upset about it. And then Allison decided to go and find answers on her own, despite the fact that at the beginning of episode 3, her abilities start to go haywire because of her guilt searing up and becoming palpable visions that she could not ignore, leading to her having a massive panic attack and then being in a situation where she reveals the secret or chooses to withhold it from Eddie, which results in the same outcome. Makes absolutely zero sense despite what happened prior to that situation. Allison and Tyler's relationship is just as bizarre because they never seem to get angry at one another regardless if the two of them do something that they hate. Whereas Sean and Daniel conveyed that their bond was much stronger through the anger, hate, and love that they experience, Tyler and Allison have a fight, say I'm sorry, and move on. My only explanation is that the game was rushed. It's only 3 episodes long, each one taking about 2 hours to complete, or an hour and a half if you rush through it, which is too short from the normal 5 parts that narrative games usually consist of. The way that conflict is just brought up and immediately resolved to further the plot seems way too convenient, and it would explain why a lot of drama that should have been extended further into the game would have been just immediately dissolved into the background. Like I stated, it could have been an incredible moment where you decide whether Tyler has changed or still remains close to Allison when she gives you that ring provided to Eddie as a type of peace offering, and then she constantly brings that up, stating something along the line that Eddie tried to be a good person and show his sympathy towards your issues, but the fact that you threw away his ring just shows that you don't respect me anymore. Something along the line of that, in which their bond is constantly tested because they haven't seen each other for years. And that's when I realized Tell Me Why isn't about showcasing the bond between Tyler and Allison, but instead telling the player about the bond between Tyler and Allison. Whereas in previous Don't Nod narrative experience, you got to see that bond develop over time with Chloe and Max and Sean and Daniel, so you understood where they're coming from. Here you're just told accept it for what it is. Take, for example, Life is Strange 2 Episode 4, where Sean is shown to go through life and death in order to find Daniel. He's willing to sacrifice everything as he disobeys the FBI, walks through the desert, and almost gets shot just for his little brother. At that moment, you see how much he loves his brother. But that moment never comes and tell me why. It's just simply, I'm sorry, please forgive me, okay, I love you.
Don't! Go ahead. What? Shoot me in the face. And live with it. No! Stop!
In terms of quality, Tell Me Why is adequate. The visuals look great and the character models are extremely detailed. Although they do have these strange eyes where when they're staring at one another, it almost looks like lifeless dolls, especially during one-on-one conversations. But overall, the visual quality is well done, sound is well done, and the voice acting is spectacular. Tyler and Allison are fantastic, and I definitely like how the voice actors sell their performance. Not a fan of the overall narrative and consequential dialogue, but in terms of the overall visual and audio presentation, it is extremely well done, and I'm glad that Dontnod took the added effort to make sure that the game runs correctly. We won't have more issues like Life is Strange Episode 2 with floating character models, things speeding very quickly, and of course crashes. Tell Me Why tries really hard to be a profound dynamic between Allison and Tyler. Bonded through secrets, the two uncover a trove of hidden things about their mother that results in very little changes and throughout the journey has little risk. With no profound outcome, Tell Me Why ends with a whimper as your choices leading up to these final moments mean very little.